They pitied her when he left on their wedding night. They whispered, "Poor Duchess," like it was a prayer. But pity is a fragile crown, and she was about to trade it for power. London had perfected the art of kindness that cuts. It wore silk gloves to do it. At the opera, where chandeliers trembled with applause and diamonds rehearsed their brightness, fans flicked open like little trapdoors for gossip to drop through. On the third tier, in a box lit by the strictest candlelight, Lady Isadora Wren, Duchess of Harland, sat alone with the posture of a statue and the heart of a storm. They said her husband had left the very night they wed. They said he'd ridden out before dawn, leaving a bed still warm and a name that suddenly weighed more than gold. They said a great many things because people who have not yet suffered prefer stories that let them practice. Isadora did not correct them. She let the city paint her portrait with pity and then studied how it used its brush. Below, violins climbed like hope trying to be brave. In her box, she lifted the opera glass not to admire the soprano, but to steady her hands. The glass was cool, obedient. Objects always are. She lowered it again and took in her reflection in the gilt mirror, dark hair coiled with mathematical neatness, a gown of winter white that admitted no stains, skin too composed to betray sleeplessness. The candle by her elbow stuttered, recovered, and kept its promise to burn. Across the rotunda, ladies leaned toward one another as if trading charity. "Poor creature," mouthed one behind a flutter of lace. "He left her," replied another, delighted with the currency of certainty. A gentleman who lived off inherited opinions lifted his brows to indicate both expertise and innocence. "She must have been frigid," his expression said, "or foolish, or both." A duke, half drunk on approval, pretended not to stare. A widow who had learned real grief shook her head and looked away. Isadora's lips curved by the smallest permissible degree. "Let them practice," she thought. "I shall debut later." When the act ended, the crowd spilled into the crimson corridors for sherbet and speculation. A young countess approached with kindness, sharp and thin. "Your Grace," she breathed, "I had heard you were ill. How brave you are to be seen. How tedious it is to be talked about when one is not," Isadora replied, smiling as if she had approved the weather. The countess blinked, then recovered. "If you need anything, I find that those who truly need have already asked me," Isadora said gently, and with a polite inclination of her head, dismissed pity as if it were a footman who had misheard an order. She did not flee. She walked unhurried, unbent down the corridor lined with mirrors that multiplied her into myth. In every reflection, the same woman looked back, fragile only where she chose, formidable in the geometry of survival. She paused at the last mirror and allowed herself a single private truth. "It hurt," she whispered, barely parting her lips. The mirror, being honest, did not argue. Outside, the night had dressed itself in rain. Carriages hissed along slick cobbles. Coach lamps made little sermons out of puddles. Her carriage waited the Harland crest, still presuming a future, and her coachman, bless him, looked anywhere but at her face. She rode home through streets that preferred to believe in tragedy because it flatters those who are not presently living one. Harland House met her with its accustomed chill. Marble does not sympathize. The butler bowed with the correctness of a man who knows the temperature of scandal. "Your Grace," he murmured, "shall I have a tray sent up?" "No," she said, unbuttoning the pale gloves that had survived the evening without blood. "Send hot water. I intend to wash the city off." In her room's tall windows, serious draperies, a hearth that warmed for duty rather than affection, she dismissed the maid, undid the last hook at her nape, and stood a long while before the dressing mirror. Deprivation is a teacher. It had taught her what remained when the audience went home. There he had stood the Duke of Harland, newly minted husband, old in excuses on a night that had promised roses and delivered thorns. He had not raged. He had not wept. He had only said, as if reading an edict he had written for someone else, "I must go to the north. There are matters that cannot wait." "Nor can a bride," she had replied, soft as silk over steel. "Isadora, it had begun, like a man explaining winter to a window. Do not name me," she had said, already learning the protection of distances. "Return when you can." He had bowed impeccably. He had left a ring that circled her finger and nothing inside it. That had been months ago. Since then, London had practiced 10 different ways to be sorry for her. She had learned to catalogue them like herbs. rue for the women who made pity a perfume, aloes for men who found her humiliation medicinal, rosemary for the few, so few, who remembered to mix compassion with discretion. She steeped none of it. She brewed her own remedy. She crossed to the window and unlatched it. Rain came in, smelling of iron and honesty. Candles trembled but held. She leaned her forehead against the glass and allowed the cold to inform her. "You are alive," it said. "Begin there." On the desk lay the letters she should have burned. Harlan's hand, precise, impatient, not unkind, had written of injuries to tenants in the north, of a dispute with a mill owner, of floods that required his oversight and not his marriage. He had written like a duke, not a husband. She had replied like a duchess, not a girl. There was safety in roles. There was also a loneliness that could bankrupt empires. Isadora lit a taper and touched it to a clean sheet. The light found its appetite and grew. She did not feed it with pain. She fed it with indecision. The paper curled, blackened, forgave. No more, she told the room. It had been waiting to be told. No more rehearsing grief for an audience already satisfied. In the morning, she took breakfast, not in the small blue parlor that women are given to be contained by, but in the front hall where the staircase split the house like a choice. The butler blinked once and reordered his theology. She ate strawberries as if they were obedience. Then she summoned her secretary. "Lady Isadora?" he asked, startled to find the Duchess where dukes declare. "Her Grace," she corrected gently, "and yes, we will make several calls." She slid a list across the table. The names were not of duchesses. They were of booksellers, instrument makers, a painter who ate when patrons remembered to admire, a schoolmistress whose pupils outnumbered her coins, a printer rumored to have ideas more dangerous than ink. "Your Grace," the secretary said, his tone that of a man about to learn a new trade. "These are not the usual calls?" She smiled without teeth. "No, we are governed by the unusual now." By noon, she moved through the city like a small revolution disguised as courtesy. In a print shop that smelled of paper and ambition, she invested enough to keep ideas warm through winter. In a painter's cold studio, she stood before canvases that had not yet found courage and said, "Yes." In a schoolroom where girls recited numbers to prove they existed, she left coins and more daring books. At each door, she was recognized. At each door, she rearranged recognition. Word spread the way wind does when it decides to be useful. The Duchess visits tradesmen. The Duchess funds a school. The Duchess speaks to a printer as if he were not a scandal but a citizen. That afternoon, she returned to Harland House to discover that mirrors alter themselves when the person they reflect does. She looked less tragic in the glass, or perhaps tragedy had remembered to be temporary. In the evening, she dressed in emerald, not morning's black, not apologies cream. The color took up the light like a promise. At Lady Penbury's salon, where conversation pretends to be sport and is actually a market, she entered not as spectacle, but as standard. People turned. They always do when the story hands them a new ending. "Your Grace," said Lord Ashcombe, the Duke's oldest friend, a man with hands capable of kindness and a reputation for not wasting them. He bowed with the attentiveness of a person who has practiced listening. "London is astonished." "London is easily entertained," Isadora replied. "And you?" he asked. "Are you entertained?" "I am busy," she said, "and learning." She paused. "It turns out that pity is only powerful when I accept the seat it offers. I prefer to stand." Something like respect happened to his face. "Be careful," he said lightly. "Men will fall in love with that sentence." "They are welcome to love the sentence," she said. "I am not yet lending the person." Laughter trembled at the edge of the room and dared to be genuine. In a corner, a dowager with eyes that remembered everything raised her teacup in salute. Pity, inconvenienced, went to look for other employment. Isadora left the salon before the room could interrogate her into artifice. Outside, the night had dried into starlight. She stood on the steps a moment longer than politeness required and breathed. Her life did not fit the map she had been handed. She would draw another. Back at Harland House, she crossed her threshold as if entering an ally rather than an enemy. She went straight to the mirror that had not argued earlier, and met her own gaze as if it belonged to a stranger she meant to befriend. "They will remember my name," she said, not as challenge now, but as project. London, that quick study, listened at keyholes and rearranged its questions. Who is she becoming? It asked itself. and how soon before desire learns her address. Isadora pinched out the last candle and let the darkness answer. Soon enough. Transformation does not announce itself with trumpets. It begins quietly in the mind, in the tilt of a chin, in the refusal to bow where one once bent. By spring, London had learned a new word, scandal. But it no longer applied to the Duke who left. It applied to the woman who refused to stay ruined. The Duchess of Harland had changed her mourning silks for colors the city didn't know how to interpret. Pale blue for defiance, emerald for intention, ivory for freedom. And every time she appeared in public, London tilted its head like a bird that hears a song it doesn't yet understand. At first, she attended gatherings the way a ghost attends funerals, present, polite, untouchable. But ghosts fade. Isadora refused to. At Lady Whitmore's salon, a place where conversation dressed itself in poetry and poison, she walked in, wearing a gown of deep green satin that shimmered with movement. Her hair, pinned in effortless rebellion, gleamed beneath candlelight. Heads turned, fans paused, and whispers bloomed faster than flowers in May. "Good heavens," someone gasped. "She's actually smiling." Don't be cruel," another whispered. "Tragedy ages differently when one can afford emeralds." "Her husband's absence seems to agree with her," murmured a baroness, whose husband hadn't been sober since the coronation. Isadora caught every word. She always did. The trick was not to flinch. "Your Grace," purred Lord Ashcombe, bowing low before her. His eyes were grey, his smile clever, his reputation disreputable enough to be interesting. "They say you've become the most talked-about woman in London." "How tedious," she replied, accepting his arm. "I had hoped to become the most listened to instead." The room laughed, half with admiration, half with envy. For the first time, she felt something warm stir beneath her ribs that was not pain. It was control. Ashcombe led her to a game of wit disguised as debate. The topic, whether women should be allowed to speak their minds in public. "Only when they have one worth hearing," someone said smugly. "Then I'm certain we'll hear very little from the men tonight," Isadora answered without lifting her gaze from her glass. Gasps, laughter, a few outraged coughs, and then applause from somewhere near the back of the room. Word of that line traveled faster than any carriage. By the next morning, she was no longer the pitied Duchess. She was the woman who silenced a lord with a single sentence. Scandal had found a new shape. She leaned into it not with recklessness, but with precision. She began attending lectures, sponsoring small artists whose names frightened the ton, visiting libraries where women were not expected to linger. She sent money anonymously to the Ravenhurst School for Girls, signing the letter only as "a friend to futures." When a young debutante, barely 17, was caught alone in a garden with a viscount twice her age, the girl was exiled from polite company. The Duchess invited her to tea the following week. "Your mistake," she told her gently, "was trusting a man with your silence. Next time, use your voice." Within a month, the girl's name returned to invitation lists, and every hostess wondered how it had happened. Rumors began to evolve. "She's too clever. She's too bold. She's too free. And yet, she's magnificent." Even the Queen's ladies began borrowing her style of dress, her phrasing, her subtle rebellion wrapped in charm. By June, the Duchess's name had become synonymous with fascination. She was discussed at breakfasts, feared at suppers, and quoted at balls. Men wanted to be seen beside her. Women wanted to be seen as her. But admiration is a mirror that often hides a knife. One afternoon, while visiting an art exhibition, she came upon a new painting, her portrait, uncommissioned, unmistakable. Her face rendered in light, her eyes shadowed with mystery, her mouth caught between a smile and a secret. The title beneath read, "The Duchess Who Dared to Live." The room buzzed with excitement. Some praised the artistry, others called it indecent. "It's dangerous," a dowager whispered, "to make a woman so visible." Isadora only smiled. Then perhaps it's time they remembered what danger looks like. Behind her, a familiar voice murmured, "I always suspected you would terrify them one day." She turned Lord Ashcombe again, his expression equal parts amusement and admiration. "They mistake bravery for rebellion," he said, "but I suspect you enjoy their confusion." "I enjoy teaching London new vocabulary," she replied. He studied her face. "And what word are you teaching them today?" "Freedom," she said simply. The kind that requires no permission. Ashcombe bowed slightly. Then I hope you forgive me for wanting to learn the lesson firsthand. Her eyes flicked to him warm, unafraid. Be warned, my lord. The tuition is steep. The tension between them was unmistakable, an electricity that even propriety could not dim. But she walked away before it could become something she couldn't control. That night, when she returned home, she found an anonymous letter waiting on her desk. They whisper your name in envy now, not pity. Even the Queen mentioned you. Whatever you've done, keep doing it. No signature, no sender, only a pressed violet tucked inside. She smiled just barely and placed it between the pages of a book titled On Liberty. At her window, the city glowed with restless life. Once, she had feared it. Now, it belonged to her. And somewhere beyond the rooftops, London whispered not, "Poor Duchess," but "the woman who makes men nervous." She whispered back, to no one in particular, "Good, let them be nervous. It keeps them honest." London smelled of rain and ink. The morning the Duke of Harland returned, as if the city had washed its hands and sharpened its pen to annotate him. Carriages crowded street. James's like arguments. Boot heels clicked verdicts along Pall Mall. Gossip left its cradle at dawn and went marching. By noon, the clubs had agreed on 3 incompatible narratives. He had been wounded in the north, heroic; ruined in the north, poetic; or hiding in the north, useful. None of them prepared him for the single true thing that awaited his wife had outgrown the story he left her in. He saw it first in a shop window he did not mean to pass. A lithograph of a woman in emerald. The caption beneath delicate and insolent, "The Duchess who dared to live." His reflection hovered beside hers like a footnote no one now bothered to read. He should have kept walking. Instead, he stood for one long, foolish minute and learned the cost of absence. That evening, Harland stepped into Lady Penbury's glittering salon, as if into a court of law. Chandeliers performed miracles overhead. Laughter stitched itself into banners. Violins suggested that happiness could be civilized if properly tuned. Conversations stuttered, then reassembled with new punctuation. Heads turned. A few ladies found their pity too small to wear. A few gentlemen volunteered to be forgiving if fashionable. None of it reached him. His attention had already been taken hostage. Isadora stood near the fireplace, speaking to a mathematician and a duchess who had mastered both wit and survival. Her gown was ivory with a restless sheen, like moonlight trying on courage. Her hair had learned to disobey pins gracefully. Her smile was not for show, which is why it worked. People orbited her without touching. Painters, philosophers, a prince pretending to need directions. She was not the scandal. She was the center. She saw him. She did not flinch. She inclined her head the way queens greet countries. "Your Grace," she said when he approached, borrowing the air's temperature rather than offering her own. "Isadora." His voice had aged, a new gravel, a mile of road behind each syllable. "You look well?" she supplied. "Yes, London has been most educational." He had meant to begin with apology, or at least arithmetic. Instead, he heard himself say the worst version of the truth. "You've changed." "No." She let the word be quiet and therefore sovereign. "I simply stopped apologizing for surviving you. It was not cruel, merely accurate." Which, he discovered, was worse. Lord Ashcombe arrived precisely late enough to be effective. "Harland," he drawled, bowing with a grace that forgave his reputation. "Welcome back to the century." He turned to Isadora, and the room tilted infinitesimally toward them. "You promised the Italian you would finish your argument about impossible numbers." She smiled. "I have decided most impossible things are only poorly named." Harland watched the exchange with a soldier's unease, the old instinct to map high ground and exits. Ashcombe stood too close without trespass. Isadora's laughter arrived quickly and left nothing for scavengers. Around them, men revised their positions as if a new moon had altered the tide. "May I claim a minute with my wife?" Harland asked, formality polishing the plea. "If she allows it," Ashcombe said mildly. Isadora did. Not out of concession, but out of mastery. She led Harland to the edge of the room, where a marble nymph pretended not to listen. Up close, the change in her was more radical. Pity had once sat in her eyes like damp weather. Now there was sky blue, exact, immense. "I have letters," he began. "Explanations." "You always did," she said. But explanations are rooms where men store reasons after they've moved out of responsibility. He swallowed. There were floods, a miller who would not pay, and families who could not eat, and, "I know," she said softly, and the gentleness cut more cleanly than contempt. "I read the reports, sent money you forgot to ask for, and kept your tenants fed while you learned the difference between steadfast and absent. I am glad you went. I am sorrier you did not return sooner." He shut his eyes for a breath, then opened them on a world rearranged by her sentences. "You must hate me." "I did, briefly. It was inefficient." She tilted her head, considering him the way a scientist considers weather. "Hate cost more than it purchased. I chose investment instead." "In what?" "Myself." She smiled with no warmth and no cruelty, only conclusion. "It has begun to pay." Seeps. Across the room, a duchess asked for Isadora's opinion on an exhibition. A poet hovered, pretending to be incidental. Harland became aware of how the air changed where she walked, the way talk recalibrated to include her. Men admired her without presuming purchase. Women measured themselves by her and did not resent the arithmetic, because she had retaught them how numbers could be kind. "Did you miss me?" he asked, hating himself for how boyish it sounded. "How late?" "I missed a husband," she said. "Then I learned to miss less." He flinched. "And now? Now I have work. I have a school, and a printer who requires nerve, and an artist who thinks light can be persuaded back into a ruined canvas. I have inconveniences that feel like purpose." He had come prepared to offer apologies arranged like flowers. Instead, he found himself wanting to offer labor. "Let me help." "With which?" Her tone wasn't skeptical, it was administrative. "With whatever you will allow." She studied him. For a heartbeat, he was the man who had learned to dig trenches in the rain and not drown. "Come to the school on Thursday," she said at last. "Bring books they'll actually read, and leave your title on the step. It startles the small ones." "Very well." The concession felt like air. "Good." She nodded once, concluded the audience, and turned back toward the room that had been waiting for her. He watched her re-enter the current, altering it as she went, and understood with surgical clarity. Every duke desired her not because she was decoration, but because she had become direction. The evening continued its graceful violence. He was introduced to men who owed her debts, and women who owed her courage. The Queen's lady-in-waiting asked Isadora for a list of girls who might attend the palace lectures. A foreign envoy mistook Harland for an attendant. Harland almost thanked him for the mistake. Twice he reached for the old anchor of pride and found it had drifted, replaced by something quieter that might, if tended, become strength. Near midnight, the room contracted for a final waltz. Ashcombe claimed, Isadora with insolent courtesy. Harland watched them from the margin, where men stand, who are relearning language. They danced not intimately, but intelligently, the kind of dancing that makes observers wish they could read. On the second turn, Isadora's gaze flicked past her partner to find Harland. Not to punish, to measure. He held the look, and for the first time in months, she gave him a fraction of softness. It was not an invitation, it was a hypothesis. Outside, the night had rinsed itself of rumor. Harland declined his carriage and walked alone through streets that had witnessed better men fail. He passed the lithograph shop again. The green woman in the window did not blink. He lifted a hand as if to touch the glass, then let it fall. "You were supposed to fade without me," he told the city that had adopted her. From somewhere inside the dark, his better sense answered, "She was supposed to burn." He arrived home to a house that knew his habits too well, and his wife not at all. On his desk, beside ledgers and letters, lay a small calling card in her hand. Thursday, 10 o'clock. Books, not speeches. Beneath it, almost an afterthought, 2 words he had not earned. "Thank you." He sat, laughing once at the strangeness of gratitude as mercy. Then he did the hour's only useful thing. He began a list of titles children might love, stories where orphans become captains, where girls outthink kings, where boys apologize and are not considered smaller for it. When sleep ambushed him at last, it came with a promise disguised as a question. Can a man learn to deserve the future he once abandoned? The city did not answer. It rarely does. London's social calendar had always preferred illusion to truth, and the winter masquerade at Ravensworth Hall was its purest devotion. Masks gave permission to honesty, Candlelight promised forgiveness, and music conspired to make every sin look graceful. The Duchess of Harland arrived late, as she always did now, not from arrogance but strategy. Her entrance was the prelude society didn't know it needed. Tonight, she wore black velvet trimmed with gold, a gown that drank light instead of reflecting it, and a mask of filigreed lace that revealed enough to remind the world she was still flesh, not legend. Every conversation paused when she stepped through the archway. The room inhaled her presence. Even the orchestra faltered before resuming in nervous elegance. Lord Ashcombe, ever the provocateur, appeared by her side before the first whisper could form. "You've come dressed as danger," he murmured. She turned slightly, eyes gleaming behind her mask. "And you've come as repetition. Repetition improves with practice. Not when it leads nowhere," she said, lips curving faintly. He laughed, but his laughter held resignation. He was a man accustomed to pursuit, and she was a woman who had redefined what victory meant. Then the air shifted, a subtle pressure, a vibration known only to hearts once broken in the same rhythm. The Duke had arrived. Adrian Harland entered unmasked. The audacity alone stole attention from every silk and sapphire in the room. He wore black, no embellishment, as if mourning the years he had wasted. His eyes found her instantly. They always did. She froze, not visibly, but deep beneath the layers of control she had spent 2 years perfecting. He was not supposed to look so undone, or so alive. "Your Grace," Ashcombe greeted with a tone that could sharpen glass. "You risk becoming a theme." "I risk nothing," Harland said. His gaze never left his wife, except regret. Isadora inclined her head, her tone neutral and devastating. Regret rarely arrives dressed so confidently. He took a step closer, and the scent of him, cedar, ink, something once familiar, folded time. "You shouldn't be here." "And yet I am," she said, voice steady. "Unlike you, I rarely abandon invitations." Ashcombe raised a brow, sensing a war too intimate to interrupt. "I'll find the champagne." He left, but not before giving Harland a look that promised future reckoning. The waltz began. "May I have this dance?" the Duke asked quietly. "You may have the moment," she replied. "The dance, however, is mine." Still, she placed her gloved hand in his, and the world retreated. They moved together with a grace that made the music obsolete. His touch was cautious, reverent. Hers was composed, deliberate. When he turned her, her mask brushed his jaw, and he thought of every letter he never sent, every night he had mistaken pride for penance. "You've changed the rhythm," he said. "No," she whispered, eyes locked on his. "You finally learned to follow." He almost smiled. "You've become cruel." Truth often sounds that way to those who ran from it. Around them, the crowd saw only elegance, a reconciled couple perhaps, or actors performing civility. Only the two of them knew it was confession disguised as choreography. When the music ended, applause erupted, a sound too loud to mean sincerity. She withdrew her hand slowly, as if severing a pulse. "I should thank you," he said, voice low, "for what you've become." "You should thank yourself," she answered, "for teaching me what to outgrow." He stepped closer until the space between them became a promise. "Do you hate me so completely?" "I don't hate you at all," she said, and it was somehow worse. "I remember you, that's all. Memory is sharper than hatred. It cuts longer." He inhaled, unsteady. "Then let me earn new memories." "You can't," she said, turning toward the terrace. "But you may try." He followed. Outside, the night was brittle with frost. Candles flickered in the windows behind them, their light too timid to follow. "Isadora," he said, her name trembling on the air. "I never meant to—" "Don't explain," she interrupted softly. "Your absence said it all. I was trying to save us." "You saved your conscience," she said, looking up at the stars. "You left me to save myself." He moved closer until his breath warmed her temple. "And did you?" She looked at him, then really looked, and for a heartbeat, the world reset itself. "Yes," she whispered, "and you should see what remains." Their faces were inches apart, and silence became unbearable. He reached for her, fingertips trembling, but she didn't retreat this time. His hand cupped her cheek, and the chill of the air melted between them. The kiss hovered like a decision between past and future. Then one breath, one moment, their lips met. It was not tender. It was not civilized. It was two storms recognizing their twin. When they finally broke apart, her eyes burned. "You'll regret that," she said. "I already regret everything before it." She turned away first. "Then learn from it, Adrian. Desire is nothing without discipline," he exhaled. "And love?" She paused, her voice almost breaking. "Love is everything, but timing decides whether it's a blessing or a curse." Behind them, the orchestra began again, a faster waltz this time, reckless, youthful. She left him standing in the cold, his hand still raised as if the ghost of her touch lingered there. Inside, she passed through the ballroom without looking back, her heartbeat steady, but her soul trembling. Lord Ashcombe appeared beside her, his eyes catching the glint of unshed tears. "Did he apologize?" "He tried," she said softly. "But some wounds don't close with words. They require distance. And what will you do now?" "Howbie?" She smiled faintly, the kind that promised both heartbreak and hope. "I will keep dancing." By the time winter surrendered to spring, London had a new religion, and its altar was the Duchess of Harland. Her name fluttered on every fan, her silhouette painted in shop windows, her phrases copied into diaries by women who had once feared being noticed. "She walks like consequence," one columnist wrote. Another, bolder still, declared, "Every duke may rule his estate, but only one woman rules London." Even the Queen smiled at the scandal of admiration and said, "Pity suits no woman as poorly as it suits her." The Duchess had not intended to rule, she had only intended to live. But the two, in her case, were indistinguishable. She had turned the abandoned halls of Harland House into a school for girls, not merely a charity, but a rebellion disguised as curriculum. They learned languages and logic, history and self-respect. In her study, she hosted writers whose words the world pretended not to understand, painters who painted truth instead of likeness, and musicians who composed joy without permission. Rumor declared she held an invisible court, where art replaced gossip and intellect was the only dowry. Society was unsure whether to condemn or copy her, and so, predictably, it did both. But every story must have its shadow. In drawing rooms and gentlemen's clubs, men whispered that she had become too powerful, too desired. "A woman admired by all men," one lord sneered, "is unfit for any." Another replied, "Then perhaps she is the only one truly fit for herself." And still, they sent flowers. Every morning her doorstep bloomed with tributes, orchids from Paris, violets from Vienna, and one bouquet of red camellias left without a card. She knew who had sent those. The Duke had not stopped haunting her. He came to the school every Thursday, exactly as she had instructed. No titles, no arrogance, just a man carrying books. The children adored him. He taught geography and kindness with equal conviction. The first time she overheard him laugh, unguarded and warm, she had to close the door before memory overwhelmed her. He never stayed past dusk, never lingered for tea. They spoke only briefly about repairs, schedules, lessons. Their sentences were careful, scaffolding around the ruins of something once unspoken. But London saw everything, and imagination filled in the silence. Soon, the gossip returned, not with pity this time, but hunger. "Have you heard? The Duke visits her weekly. Perhaps she has forgiven him." Perhaps he never stopped loving her. To the world, it was romance. To her, it was reclamation. At a garden fete hosted by Lady Winthrop, the Duchess made her first appearance since the masquerade. The garden glittered with chandeliers strung from trees and laughter that could be heard from the street. Every duke in attendance, widowed, unmarried, or wishful, found himself circling her like stars around an unwilling sun. Lord Ashcombe, more dangerous than all of them because he actually understood her, appeared at her side. "You've become their favorite game," he murmured. "Games require players," she replied. "I prefer rules." "And what are yours, Duchess?" "That no one wins without permission." He smiled, tracing the edge of her glass with a fingertip. "And does anyone have it?" She looked toward the far end of the garden where Adrian Harland stood in shadow, watching her. "No," she said softly, "not anymore." Her voice did not waver, but her pulse betrayed her, because she could feel his eyes not possessive, but penitent, not claiming, but learning. Later that evening, when she stepped onto the terrace for air, she found him there. "You shouldn't be alone," he said. "I never am," she replied. "The city keeps me company." He hesitated, Then, quietly, "They say you've become the most desired woman in England." "They exaggerate," she said. "Desire is seasonal." He studied her face, the calm mastery, the faint sorrow beneath. "And yet you look free." She smiled faintly. "Freedom isn't what I wanted. It's what I made from the ruins." He moved closer. "Do you know what I learned, Isadora? That regret is heavier than pride? That I am not jealous of the men who want you," he said, voice rough. "I am jealous of the woman who does not need me." The silence between them pulsed with recognition. "Then learn from her," she said. "Perhaps she can teach you." He exhaled a broken laugh. "She already is." A pause. The night hummed. Then he reached into his coat and handed her a sealed envelope. "For you," he said. Inside, a letter written in his own hand. "Forgive me, not as a husband, but as a man who finally understands what love costs." She read it slowly, then folded it once, twice, 3 times, and held it over the flame of a nearby candle. The fire caught, climbed, and turned it to smoke. He didn't speak. He only watched. When the ash drifted away, she looked at him. "Some debts are not meant to be repaid. They are meant to end." He nodded once. "Then let me at least thank you." "For what?" "For proving that what I left was worth returning to." She didn't answer. She turned back to the stars, her profile serene and luminous in the torchlight. Inside, the orchestra began another waltz. Men waited for her return. The world waited for her smile. She inhaled deeply, feeling the clean, sharp air of her own making. Once, she had begged for love to save her. Now, she had become the kind of woman who saved herself, and in doing so, saved everyone who believed survival meant surrender. As she stepped back into the glow of chandeliers and violins, London seemed to bow, and from somewhere in the crowd, a whisper began, one that would become legend before the season ended. The Duchess everyone pitied became the woman every duke desired, but she only desired herself. Years passed as they always do, pretending they were only days. The seasons changed, and London's gossip learned new names to pronounce and ruin. But one name remained untouchable, whispered, admired, sometimes envied: Isadora, Duchess of Harland. She was no longer the darling of scandal or the ghost of pity. She had become something far rarer, a woman who had learned to exist on her own terms. The city she once feared now wore her influence like perfume. The schools she had founded multiplied, her salons continued without her presence, and her essays published anonymously, yet unmistakably hers, reshaped the conversations of men who had once laughed at the thought of learning from women. Her portrait, The Duchess Who Dared to Live, hung now in the Royal Academy, no longer as controversy, but as art. Beneath it, a small plaque read simply, Isadora Wren, Harland patron, scholar, reformer. She taught London how to think beautifully. In the quiet village of Marbridge, far from the noise of dukes and diamonds, she had made a life of deliberate peace. Her house was small, whitewashed, and framed with ivy. The garden overflowed with wild roses untamed, the way she preferred them. Every morning, she rose before sunrise, poured tea by the window, and wrote letters to people she would never meet, girls who needed courage, widows who needed kindness, and dreamers who needed permission. Her words traveled faster than she ever could, and that was enough. One afternoon, as spring softened into summer, her housekeeper entered the study, carrying a single letter. "It's from London, Your Grace," she said. Isadora hesitated before taking it. The handwriting was unfamiliar yet careful, not from a clerk, not from a solicitor. From someone who had written and rewritten before sending. She broke the seal. "Isadora, forgive me for writing again. I will not burden you with regret. I suspect you've already turned it into something useful. I only wish to tell you that the schools flourish. The children remember your name with reverence, and I have learned that titles fade faster than kindness. I am leaving England for the colonies. They say the land there is wild, but I find I am at peace with wilderness now. You taught me that. If ever you think of me, think not of the man who left, but of the one who finally learned to arrive, even if only too late. Adrian." She read it twice, not to remember, but to release. The last time she had seen him was 3 years prior, at the Queen's Winter Assembly. He had been thinner, quieter, almost gentle. He had bowed to her in a way that suggested prayer, not pride, and she had smiled, not with forgiveness, but with completion. Now, as she folded the letter, She felt neither ache nor anger, only gratitude. He had kept his promise to change the ending, not the beginning. Outside, the garden glowed with evening. She stepped out, barefoot, feeling the earth cool beneath her feet. The air smelled of jasmine and rain, her favorite contradictions. The villagers often passed her gate, waving respectfully. To them, she was simply Lady Isadora, the kind woman who funded books for the school and played piano at the harvest festival. Few remembered she was once a duchess. None dared to pity her. She walked to the rose archway at the back of her garden where, years ago, she had buried a small box. Inside it rested a wedding ring, a lock of hair, and a note that read, "I choose myself." Kneeling now, she brushed away a few petals and smiled. "We did well," she whispered to her younger self. "We kept our promise." A soft breeze answered. That evening, her study filled with candlelight. She sat at her desk, quill poised over parchment, and began writing the final pages of her memoir, the one she would never publish. They said I was a duchess made for pity. I say I was a woman built for purpose. Love did not save me, it introduced me to myself. The rest was my own design. She paused, smiling, as laughter drifted in from the nearby village square. The schoolgirls she had taught were rehearsing their yearly play. Their voices carried across the fields, innocent and bright. As the candles burned lower, she set down her pen, closed the book, and looked toward the horizon. There, beyond the hills, the sky was bleeding gold into violet. She could almost hear London in the distance, still whispering her name, but now it was no longer scandal. It was reverence. Somewhere across the ocean, she imagined Adrian standing beneath a foreign sky, perhaps thinking of her as she thought of him, not with longing, but with peace. And she whispered into the twilight, her voice steady and sure, "We loved, we lost, we learned, and that is enough." The garden wind carried her words through the open window, over the roses, into the night. By morning, the Duchess was awake before the sun again. She poured tea, opened her notebook, and began a new letter, this one to a young girl she had never met, starting with the sentence that would outlive her name. "They may pity you today, my dear, but one day they will ask for your secret.